Welcome back, everyone. I'm Colin Demarest, the Cyber and Networks reporter at C4ISRNet. In this session, we will be discussing network portability, communications infrastructure, and AP&T, or Assured Positioning, Navigation, and Timing. My guests this morning on the far end are Mike Trzak, a P&T project manager at the Program Executive Office for Intelligence, Electronic Warfare, and Sensors, or PEO IEWNS, and closer to me, Jock Paget, the Chief Technology Officer at the 18th Airborne Corps. Hope you guys are doing well.
Doing well, thank you.
We have limited time, so maybe we should just jump right in. We are at AUSA on the last day, so maybe I could get a temperature check from both of you. Mike, what's the navigation and timing landscape looking like as we head toward the end of the year? And same question to you, Jock, if you want to start.
It looks good. A lot of good interest out there. I've had several dozen engagements with P&T providers and systems and managers of systems that are concerned about P&T and how do they get assured P&T to support their systems, right, when we go into denied environments that we're experienced today. So good landscape, a lot of good technologies and industries interest out there.
Jock, your read?
Very, very similar, Mike. I'm seeing a lot of advancements on the network side as you start talking smarter networks. Previous session, what Dan alluded to as far as the programmability of the network, there's a lot of good technologies that are coming out. And, it's one thing for industry to signal. It's another thing for the military to adopt and accept in and figure out how we can advance our capabilities forward. I'm starting to see that there's a vertex of meaning right there that we can talk about in a little bit. So very positive.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump back and forth between you guys because I know there's some overlap, but you are experts in your own field. So pardon the back and forth here, but Jock, let's start with you. Could you give us a read generally, and maybe you want to drill down on it afterward, but on CJADC2? Yesterday afternoon, I moderated another event, and I heard CJADC2 AP. I'm behind the ball on that one. I don't know if you use that phrase, but maybe if you want to tell us what's up.
So the second A is new to me. So JADC2 in its original form, we're all familiar with it, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. The C, coalition combined, however you want to flavor that, is kind of an obvious thing whenever you talk about, battlefield and the interactions of nations in there. The P is most important because we never, in recent history, we have not fought a war without a partner, right? So there's this, if we just consider ourselves, just consider our coalition combined kind of scenarios, we're going to miss out on the partners. And look at the scenario right now in EUCOM theater. There's very much a partner that has to be accounted for, that has to be digitally enabled, that has to have an interconnected network from my perspective. And they're fighting in a rough environment that we're gaining a lot from. But that's the P part of it is considering our partners as a tenant to the idea of JADC2.
And so that additional C in the front is obviously added complexity. Mm-hmm. This new partner is more complexity, but is partner harder to integrate with versus coalition or combined, or is there a noticeable difference there at all?
I would say in a lot of ways it's actually easier. They don't necessarily come with decades of, the policy mentioned before. They don't come with decades of tech debt, those type of things that you have to weave your way through. And it's specifically if they are in the fight immediately, all that stuff kind of gets, torn down anyways in order to build quality technology that enables that force. So in my personal experience with this, it has actually been easier in order to integrate the willing to create better effects whenever it comes to technology, networks, cloud, all those other types of things.
That's interesting. Let's jump to you, Mike. You mentioned EUCOM, so I was curious how the U.S. is weaning itself from GPS reliance, especially seeing the jamming and spoofing that's going on over there in Eastern Europe.
Weaning's a good word. I'll say slowly. It's a culture change, right? GPS has been the gold standard for positioning and timing for 30 years, right? So now if you can't use GPS, where are you getting it? And do you understand where you're getting it? And as mentioned before, how do you assure the places that you're getting it from? So there are a half dozen or more different global positioning systems, right? When we say GPS, we're speaking the U.S. system. But there's also GLONASS, BIDO, Galileo that we can leverage to wean ourselves from GPS. And then we're also leveraging onboard sensors and technologies in the latest capabilities that we start fielding here next year. From my perspective, it's the mounted assured PNT system and the dismounted assured PNT system.
And so with those alternative means, is it inertial? Is it tracking the wheels going around? Is it referencing landmarks on the landscape?
So the other challenge is how good's good enough, right? So if you can't have GPS, which is the gold standard, how good do you need your position or your timing? And I'll tell you, that's very mission dependent. And so those sensors are dependent on the mission, right? For positioning, vision-aided nav shows a lot of promise. IMUs have been used for years, right? But they're expensive, and there's a large breadth of capabilities within IMUs. Wheel speed sensors or wheel speed disciplined IMUs, and then, as mentioned earlier, alt nav, right? Other RF signals outside of GPS or even one of the other global GPS positioning systems.
And we can always go back to maps, right? I mean, the paper is not going away.
The paper's not going away.
Okay. Jock, how do you see the shift from network centricity in the Army to data centricity affecting the 18th Airborne or the Army more broadly?
I think there has to be a fundamental shift in how we utilize data and appreciate, anything from, the tagging of data in order to create shareability at the data level. Traditionally, we've tackled it with the network. We've been completely network centric, so we create, the MPE, which is yet another environment, but and we throw cross-domain solutions in between in order to solve this, separation of nations in a digital perspective. I see the advancements forward whenever we talk about data centricity is actually tagging the data to a degree to where this data element has the ability to be shared with other nations, partners, that sort of thing, and start tearing down these boundaries or these other networks that we create. And then with zero trust coming forward, as the department goes forward in that venture, it will allow us to share in a more meaningful manner. But there's a lot of work to be done there. You're talking, I was talking the decades of tech debt that we've accumulated, all the policies that have separated us previously. Those have to be gone through and figure out what it looks like, because fundamentally we don't want to overshare, release things that we don't need to release that are kind of protected U.S. Gov type stuff. So we're advancing in that space. We're definitely, getting sets and reps on it, that sort of thing. But it's going to be a progressive thing.
And do you see the average soldier really noticing the difference between network centricity versus data centricity, or is that more of an elevated division core, that sort of thing?
There's some tasks that are getting elevated to a higher echelon for soldiers just to be able to concentrate on their specific task at hand. We have to hold ourselves to a degree of engineering rigor that allows us, those soldiers, to be able to plug and play networks, right? We don't need to be able, have to push down 25, 26 series all the way to the tactical level in order to configure, an end item to get onto the network. Those days have to be gone. The network has to show up ready to go. It has to be push button engineered, where that user experience is literally any MOS can go up and make a network stand up. That's the point that we have to get to going forward.
And you hit on zero trust real quick, so I just want to jump back to it. Is there any key technology or kind of key investment there that you see really making a difference? Something like ICAM, maybe?
I think it's going to be a nesting of technologies, right? There's no one solution that just solves all of zero trust. There's going to be processes that have to be done as a part of zero trust. To be candid with you, we're largely letting net CFT and the PMs and the Army level decide that, because at a core level, if we decide to go down one path or another, we can find ourselves on an island, and that's not where we want to be, right? So we're letting the department solve those problems, and then we'll come in and integrate, test it out, and that's our kind of function in the overall scheme of things.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Back to you, Mike. How are you putting these AP&T tech through its paces? How do you when it's being developed, how it's being delivered, that sort of thing? How are you proving that it works before you do give it off to a soldier?
So a lot of exercises out there, right? There's a joint exercise or experiment, right? NavFest, right? That's conducted out in Wismer. There is the PNT assessment exercise that's also conducted in Wismer. Those are annual events. The vendors can go out there and test their equipment even before that we get our hands on it. We can get our hands on the data that's generated during those events, and then we do some significant testing, right? And I'll tell you, testing in denied, jammed, or spoofed environments is not an easy task. There's only a few places we can do it in the United States, and so the resources for that are limited. And so there's typically 6-8 months, a year's worth of coordination that go into executing a live sky environment test. And so, but we are putting it through its paces.
Have you seen any move towards like simulation, like live virtual constructive, to kind of get at that, because it is so sensitive sometimes you can't turn on those jammers?
I would say that the norm used to be a lot of chamber testing, a lot of simulations. As a matter of fact, there's a new chamber being built out at Fort Huachuca at EPG to do exactly that. But I'll tell you, the systems that have been built and designed by industry to combat spoofing and jamming are so complex, they typically realize that it's a chamber trying to test them, and then we just run into not getting valid data because the systems are so well designed, right? The algorithms understand that, hey, this is not a real satellite constellation. We're going to ignore some of the simulation. So it's a challenge.
Sounds like it. Let's go to you, Jock. We talked about JADC2 earlier. What are some of those biggest hurdles to achieving that seamless connectivity? You have project convergence, obviously, on the Army side. You have overmatch on the Navy side. You have ABMS on the Air Force side. Is there crosstalk there?
Yeah, there is. We run a series of exercises called Scarlet Dragon every 90 days, and a lot of it's to get after those integration challenges. So we'll reach out to and interconnect with the box, the maritime operations centers on the Navy, some of the sub centers out there, just to kind of test these threads, and ultimately these series of Scarlet Dragons end up leading up to a project convergence, and we're trying to blend those in. They also align with the guide series of exercises from the CDAO perspective, because ultimately the Corps goes and fights in a COCOM, right? So that interconnectivity, and each COCOM has a different challenge that's out there. So in order for us to stay ready, especially from a digital perspective, we have to create these scenarios that allow us to interconnect into the COCOMs as a precursor to actually having to go to a COCOM and interconnect. So that's kind of the design of the Scarlet Dragon series of exercises, aligned with the guide series of exercises from CDAO. And we're not lacking challenges, but ultimately, whenever it comes back to the network, there has to be this ability. Services in general will design solutions in order for them to be prepared, for them to be ready in the event that they get called up. But we can never miss the fact that we will end up in some realm of a mixed type formation. So there's always the potential in the future for a Marine unit to be aligned with an Army unit, to have air overhead that's talking to some kind of Navy vessel out there, and the ability to interconnect rapidly, even at a very tactical level, and that's a hard challenge to interconnect radio nets on the fly. Those are the things that really help define CJADC2 as you go up into the digital stack. Then the data is the next level of that. So we're seeing it even on the floor right here. We're seeing a lot more AI-based networking that's out there. We're seeing smarter networks to where the software and the network actually understand each other. And we're just seeing a lot of cool technology that I think you'll see over the next 6 months to a year really advance the department forward.
And so I know Scarlet Dragon is pretty well shielded from public eyes. You guys are doing some sensitive stuff out there. Could you give us a little insight, maybe, though, what that exercise looks like, what you guys are dealing with?
Yeah, it's like I described before, it is really tackling the digital challenge that we see right now. Whenever we go into a COCOM and stand up, a joint task force, and bringing all the services combined, the partners together. So essentially what we do is we come up with mission threads that we want to challenge during a Scarlet Dragon. We spend It's every 90 days. Somewhere halfway through the 90 days, we'll do what we call 1,000 decisions. Within the 1,000 decisions, essentially we have some portion of the unit that is on digital systems, and they're being challenged by, kind of a simulated environment of obstacles thrown their way, whether it's, some kind of targeting element or something like that, to see how they work through it and get sets and reps. And then most of the time, candidly, it's just a lot of engineering, saying, hey, this didn't work out this well on this piece. We need to do some engineering effort. And that could be anywhere from very tactical networks and systems down to, a division and brigade to the actual JTF element whenever we're, sitting there with our digital systems and just rolling through reps on those type of things.
And I have to ask, is it literally 1,000 decisions?
It's an attempt to get to 1,000 decisions, right? So I mean, there's even gaps in generating 1,000 options to make, right?
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal is 1,000 decisions in an hour. And if we can achieve that, that's
impressive. So, Mike, your turn. The Army recently tapped some companies for the dismounted and mounted MAPS and DAPS, the MAPS and DAPS tech. What was that process like, going from prototype to production and delivery and giving these soldiers that gear?
We broke a lot of ground. Mm-hmm. A lot of lessons learned, right? So we were prototyping under a directed requirement, and we basically took that directed requirement prototyping effort and entered the acquisition framework directly at Milestone C at a major capability acquisition. And so a lot of the challenges were ensuring that, contracts, schedules, and contract items were in place to allow that transition into a major capability acquisition. The 3-year lead up seems long, but it was really a year of prototyping and down select for vendors. And MAPS and DAPS basically followed the same path. And then it was a year of maturization, hardening, and then a final year of integration and testing. And we wrap up that testing this November for the dismounted technology and the mounted technology in February. I'll tell you the interesting thing, and it kind of goes to some of your earlier questions, is the resources required, right? So I can put GPS in your cell phone or your watch or your car. I mean, it's in every electronic practically we touch today for pocket change, essentially in comparison to MAPS or DAPS. But the resources to pull together all the different sensors in a single device, the complicated algorithms, that it's going to take to do all that integrity and the checks of the different sensors, right, to make sure you can understand which one to trust, right, and which one's assured, so that you can put an assured output out to an individual. And it's not just, an individual reading where they are on their watch, right? This is output going to command and control and networks and partner nations, right? If you think of combined JADC2 the way we were just discussing, how do we get that output out to the partners? How do they share that data? And so the amount of resources it takes to pull all that together has been lessons for both MAPS and DAPS as we made that move from prototyping. What we thought would be just a PNT device is really a significantly different effort.
And I imagine that bigger picture, that JADC2 picture, really underlines why this jam resistance of MAPS and DAPS and M-code is so important, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, as you mentioned, M-code, M-code's out there. Space Force will continue to put up more M-code satellites, and we will continue to get M-code density out in the force. As of right now, we've got DAPS and MAPS both fielded. Their initial generation ones with the 82nd. We've got it with the 101st. MAPS is in Europe and Kona Space Organization. So.
Hey, can I add something there?
Please.
Yeah. So we tend, on the AP&T realm, we tend to focus on the position and navigation because we all use maps and that sort of thing. On the networking side and all the reliance on timing from encryption, we talk about zero trust. It is as critical, as important, if not more, because we always have the ability to go back to maps and figure our way out through there. The network cannot do that without timing. right? It will literally degrade the entire network. So the T part of APT as a technologist is the most important aspect to me. I have full faith and confidence that soldiers can figure out their way through, wherever it is they're going. But the T part, in order to enable and advance CJADC2P, is mission critical in my mind.
And so, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, Maps in itself, we're integrating with 43 different clients. So a consumer of that electronic time, we call a client, right? And whether they're in a platform or they're in a talk or wherever they are, right? There's 43 different consumers right now of that timing coming out of Maps. Not to mention a lot of the dismounted clients that receive that timing from DAPS also. And
so on this piece on timing, maybe we stick with it. What do you guys think will be that next big leap for the T and PNT?
So atomic clocks are on the edge, right? They are probably that next technology that will be ubiquitous, kind of like your GPS in your watch and in your phone, right? But right now, resources and swap, right? So especially when you talk about a dismounted soldier with the 82nd, they're only carrying so much power, right? So every resource, everything we put on them taps that power resource that they have. So, but I think there's been a lot of path forward with atomic clocks. There's also network over time. Timing over the network, right? That can be shared, right? So those would be the next technologies I'd look at.
Any thoughts, Jock? Should we move on?
He's the APT
yeah. Okay. Perfect.
expert. I am not.
Oh yeah, I get it. That's why I asked him first. So let's stick with you though. The Army's talking a lot about unified network operations, UNO. How do you see that shaking things up? Maybe just at your level or more broadly with the service?
Yeah, so it is the right approach for the Army. The collapsing of enterprise and tactical, you're seeing some moves between PMs and PEOs on how they effectively reorganize and repurpose the responsibilities divvied out across the network. Fundamentally, it is a position that has to happen in order for Zero Trust to be able to be across the entire network. There's a bit of a bifurcation right now that we have to sort through between tactical networks and enterprise networks. Some of the organizations I've been a part of before have already flattened that network, but essentially what it does is it enables the next step for a connected enterprise. So anywhere from strategic all the way down to the tactical edge is something that industry has already done, whether it's the oil industry or the manufacturing industry, from the C-suite all the way down to the sensor. There's insights drawn from that. That is a progression that the Army will end up taking. So anything from all the end user systems that you see on the floor out here, all the way back to whether it's the Pentagon right down the road, should be a connected enterprise. So UNO is the right approach to that. It's going to take time. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order for us not to degrade a capability and advance and get to the end state that we're looking to achieve.
And what do you see as some of those biggest challenges between connecting people in the field back with headquarters, back where it's safe?
It's I think identity is going to be the big thing. You can't, it's going to be a struggle to connect separate identities from a tactical to an enterprise level and be able to cohesively see across the entire enterprise. So that's one of the bridges that has to be broken down in there. The other aspect of that too is the identity of robots or sensors, or all those have to be accounted for as well. And if they're not, they're just an end item on there. But in order to enable the robotics as a part of a formation, in order to enable some of the legacy end items, the identity is going to be a critical piece. A lot of the in-between items, whether it's from a cyber perspective, that sort of thing, we can work our way into what the right engineering looks like for that. But the identity is going to be a critical part.
So General Rainey has talked a lot about this human-machine integration. Air Force has something similar with its collaborative combat aircraft. How do you see all those robotics, all those drones straining the network? Yeah. I mean, that's just a lot of additional weight compared to years past.
It is. It goes back to, in order for robots to be useful, in order for us to kind of, generate mass with robots, the robots have to be easily integrated into the network. So the network has to get smart with the robotics. You're going to see you're going to see no different than your IoT systems that are in your house. The ability to integrate those or pretty much click of buttons, that sort of thing. And it has to get to that level with robots. You have to be able to share robots across formations, right? Like it can't just be specific to one formation. What I think is the kind of vertex that we're at right now whenever it comes to SATCOM capabilities, there's been some significant leaps in the commercial sector on enabling even to the smallest of formations to have very broadband access over constellations now. Obviously, AT&T is going to drive whether or not we get access to those. It can stay connected and those type things. But fundamentally, I am of the belief that there's been such a change in commercial offerings out there that it's going to advance the ability to have integrated robots and a massive integrated robots.
And so you hit on space, so maybe I can turn to you, Mike. Where do you see space capabilities folding into all this? Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Where does that go from here?
It'll increase. So as I mentioned, right, M-Code is going to continue to put up their satellites. The Space Force will continue to put up M-Code satellites. And then SDA is doing a lot of experimentation from LEO with other signals or other signals of opportunity, right? So there's either a signal that's dedicated for PNT or there's a signal that's available that you could use and leverage for PNT. And so for the most part, those come from space and we'll continue to leverage them. So for example, long-range precision fires, right, may fly through 3 or 4 different environments, right? And so it may need to leverage different PNT signals, different mechanisms as it's going through those different environments. UAVs, long-endurance UAVs, I expect that space will stay. I also expect that we'll see more contested environments in space also that'll complicate it. Ideally for assured PNT, we want the sensor right there on the platform, right there on the soldier, so we know exactly where it is and we can trust it. But to do that globally without a space capability is challenging, so space will stay part of the PNT suite.
Makes sense. I'm going to stick with you. I want to ask, because I've heard the term GPS weather report kind of thrown about. Could you maybe explain what that is and how you guys are chipping in or helping with that?
So it's basically talking PNT or NAVWAR situational awareness, right? So kind of like I was just talking with a good lead-in from long-range precision fires. If they're going to shoot, they would love to know what the interference jamming weather report is through those environments that they're flying through, from where they're launching to where they're landing and targeting, and anything in between. And so if we can provide a common operating picture that's showing that jamming environment, right, in level and depth from space down to terrestrial layers of what is flying through for UAVs, long endurance missions, and even those, and then take that weather report, add that AI component, so that we can kind of predict what are we going to fly through before we even see it, right? And so I think that's where we're talking that weather report, right? So weathermen do a lot of prediction on what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. We want to be able to get there with SA and know what our PNT jamming and spoofing environment is going to be like tomorrow.
Hopefully you guys are a little more accurate than your average meteorologist. Well, we can get to that when we get to that. Jock, just generally, how is the 18th Airborne moving toward more effective or more resilient mobile communications? Part of this panel is portable, so how does that factor in?
The fielding of the 82nd and 101st from AT&T helps us get to that point. There's I mentioned the Scarlet Dragon series, but there's a fundamental lessons learned from our time in UCOM and kind of watching the environment over there. We have to become and stay mobile. We have to be able to get into hardened resources. You can see everything nowadays, right? And I'm not talking like video ISR, the traditional days of the past 20 years. You can literally see everything. It is very difficult to hide out there. So we explore commercial technologies. We explore what the program offices have, in their coffers. We partner really well with all of the Army, but also with AFC, DEVCOM, AAL to explore some of the opportunities and the interconnections they have with industry. And the average consumer right now that loves to go RVing can go out and buy a SAT system that makes them connected 24/7. right? And after going through the rigors of testing with the program offices and the DevCom side, the AFC side of the house, that enables us to reduce risk on our side and then integrate and create capabilities for the ForceCom units that are out there. So we take those opportunities with, the Scarlet Dragon series as kind of the experimental phase. We start integrating more deeply into the CTC rotations and JRTCs and those type things to try out what it looks like whenever we do have a field problem. But those are, I fundamentally think that the commercial side is going to be, or is being right now, a great enabler to advancing our capabilities.
And Mike, on your end, what does portability mean to you guys?
So, naturally the mind goes to the dismounted soldier, right? But I think portability is the being able to leverage those sensors and those other RF frequency bands across the battlefield, right? So if you think about PNT in that jammed environment, the soldier has terrain masking, right? They can hide behind terrain. They may have, there may be one unit that has very good GPS PNT, right, and very accurate, where the rest of the unit may not. And so knowing who can execute the mission because they've got the data they need is part of that SA, and then also knowing what that environment is and making that portable, which is across the network, right? We've got to leverage the network to get that C2, right, that PNT situational awareness and that PNT understanding back to commanders so they can make those decisions.
And Jock, you hit on it earlier about the transparent battlefield. I think that's what the phrase people are using. How is signature management playing into all this new technology soldiers are carrying around, and how you guys try to stay not seen?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of discipline that has to go in that, whether or not you have to black out comms, that sort of thing, in order to reduce your EW signature. There are capabilities out there right now that produce less of a signature. I think you'll see this more of a pivot from these large, bases that have these massive dishes that are out there that really light up the sky from an RF perspective. Especially whenever it relates to our mission set, the first 14, 30 days in country, and we're trying to operate in this environment. You don't want to be seen as much. So we interplay the EW side of the core so we can see ourselves better and have a better understanding of how we are actually, how we look in the spectrum, and then that becomes a part of the decision matrix, right? Whether or not take this versus that side of things. So we have to see how we look in the RF spectrum as well.
Is that something you guys are considering?
From the dismount perspective, absolutely, right? So how many wires and cables do you want to hang on a dismounted soldier, along with all the new technologies we're putting on them? So we're looking at Bluetooth and ultra wideband, to be able to communicate within a dismounted soldier's environment or within the squad. And I will tell you, 82nd, a lot of feedback on signature management, right? The last thing they want is one more, additional layer of signature that can be seen or spotted. So we're trying to find that balance of making sure that we're providing what the soldier needs without hanging more wires and capabilities on them, and still manage and maintain that signature.
Let's stick with you. Michael Monteleone, the Assured Positioning, Navigation, and Space cross-functional team lead, he has used the phrase resiliency through diversity. What does that mean to you, and could you maybe give an example?
Sure. So I think for the most part, it's signal diversity, right? So alt-nav, right, is a capability that's outside of the GPS layers and typical bands. So alt-nav is another signal we can use. Signals of opportunity from other satellites or even terrestrial antennas. Further diversify that RF capability that we can use. So basically, it's minimizing the enemy's ability to attack all of those different sources of PNT. And so if we can diversify those signals, or even diversify more sensors on the soldier or on the platform, right, it minimizes, or it makes the attack surface so large that the enemy can't knock out all your PNT, and you can leverage that.
And Jock, I imagine there's a similar feeling on the comms side. What's that like?
So one of the first things, for our communications units, they try to find path diversity across a lot of different things. And from a mobility perspective, you're using any kind of RF. You don't want to cable yourself to something unless you know you're going fixed site. but being able to leverage whether it's local cellular networks that are out there, whether it's a multitude of constellations, we tend to already know what those look like. Now, whenever we talk about the network getting smarter, it's the ability to leverage those either all at once or whenever one's being jammed or denied to you, the ability for the packets of data to get where they need to. And that's part of the network becoming smarter. Okay, so and it doesn't necessarily have to be it doesn't have to be an enemy that's denying you. Weather was a good example of that. There are, on the RF side of the house, weather just degrades some of these signals, right? So having the network know and understand that, you know, one of its signals is about to be degraded, use this option versus that option is a key thing. That doesn't traditionally sit in our networks as they are now. So being able to feed weather data to a network so the routers and systems that are in there know and understand where to path data to is going to be it's going to be an advancement in the future in order to do assured packet delivery, assured data delivery.
And Mike, I think you might get the last word here as we're wrapping things up. What can you tell us about the recent North Star request for information? What are you guys seeking with that?
So we're seeking to pace the threat. We're looking for that next generation technology. We're looking to reduce those resources I talked about, right? So the difference between providing GPS to a soldier and providing assured PNT to a soldier is the amount of resources the soldier or platform has to carry and use. And so the North Star RFI is looking for modularity, right? How can we quickly, rapidly upgrade, multi-sources from the new technologies coming in, or even things like driver's vision enhancement, right? How do we leverage something that's already on the vehicle to pull in additional sources of PNT? Drive down cost, right? I will tell you the cost difference between GPS and assured PNT is enormous, and so we want to be able to bring down that resource burden of cost. And then it's really looking at the Army 2040, right? So what we are fielding now is Army 2030 capabilities in those units. And so by the time we get this out, we want to be ahead of the curve for Army 2040 and make sure that we're getting overmatch out by 2040.
So I think that's a good place to leave it as we're running short on time. Please join me thanking our speakers and our sponsor, CompTech. Thank you, guys, and this concludes our breakfast panel for this year's AUSA conference. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again next year, probably in the same room as last year. Have a good one, guys.